Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. Tom Wilson never wanted a fight, he just wanted peace on his own land. But when a ruthless HOA set its sights on his farm, demanding he follow rules that didn't apply to him, they made one critical mistake. They thought he would back down. Now Tom is ready to show them just how wrong they were. Tom Wilson had always dreamed of owning a piece of land where he could live on his own terms. After years of military service and a stressful corporate job, he finally found the perfect escape, a 10-acre farmstead on the outskirts of a suburban town. The property was everything he had hoped for: rolling green fields, a sturdy farmhouse in need of a little work, and a large barn that he planned to convert into a functional homestead for organic farming. It was peaceful, self-sufficient, and most importantly, completely independent from any HOA. His nearest neighbors, however, were not as thrilled. Just across the road lay Willow Creek Estates, a pristine, cookie-cutter suburban development governed by an infamously strict homeowners association, HOA. The houses were identical, the lawns perfectly manicured, and the rules extensive, dictating everything from acceptable fence colors to how long a car could be parked in a driveway. Tom had no interest in any of that. His property was legally separate, and he had checked every document before buying. He was not part of the HOA's jurisdiction. The first sign of trouble came barely a week after he moved in. A sharply folded letter appeared in his mailbox, marked with the official Willow Creek Estates HOA logo. Inside, the letter demanded that Tom immediately remove unpermitted structures, his barn and chicken coop, cease all farming activities, and maintain a uniform aesthetic in accordance with community standards. He chuckled at the absurdity. Community standards? He wasn't in their community. With a shrug, he tossed the letter in the trash, assuming it was a clerical mistake. That assumption shattered when Karen Miller, the HOA president, arrived unannounced on his property 2 days later. She was a middle-aged woman with a severe blonde bob, crisp khaki slacks, and an air of absolute authority. Flanked by 2 board members, she marched up to Tom's porch without so much as a greeting. "Mr. Wilson," she announced, crossing her arms, "we need to discuss your violations." Tom leaned against the railing, arms folded, already irritated. "I don't think we do. I'm not part of your HOA." Karen gave him a tight-lipped smile, the kind that dripped with condescension. "Oh, but you are. All properties in this area are subject to HOA oversight, whether they like it or not. And this," she gestured toward his barn, "is unacceptable." Tom's patience snapped. "This land has never been part of your HOA. I checked. I have the paperwork to prove it." Karen didn't even blink. "Oh, we'll see about that." Then, without another word, she turned on her heel and left, her board members trailing behind. Tom watched them go, a deep unease settling in his gut. Something told him this was only the beginning. At first, Tom thought Karen's threats were nothing more than empty bluster. She had no legal claim over his property, and she had to know it. But it soon became painfully clear. Karen wasn't the type to back down easily. Within a week, the pressure campaign began. HOA notices started appearing in his mailbox daily, each more aggressive than the last. They demanded that he correct zoning violations, remove unsightly farm structures, and adhere to noise ordinances. The ridiculous part: none of these rules applied to him. His property wasn't zoned as part of Willow Creek Estates. His land was classified as agricultural, and everything he was doing was perfectly legal. Then the anonymous complaints started. Tom noticed a white SUV parked near his driveway at odd hours, the driver snapping photos of his property. Soon after, the county received multiple reports accusing Tom of everything from animal neglect to unsanitary living conditions. Inspectors arrived unannounced, checking his barn, livestock, and even his composting system. Each time they found nothing wrong, but the harassment alone was exhausting. One evening, Tom was out feeding his chickens when a police car pulled up at his front gate. 2 officers stepped out, one already flipping through a clipboard. "Mr. Wilson," the taller officer called. Tom wiped his hands on his jeans and walked over. "Yeah, that's me. What's this about?" "We received a complaint that you're running an unlicensed livestock operation within a residential neighborhood." Tom let out a humorless laugh. "You've got to be kidding me." He gestured toward his goats and chickens. "I own 10 acres. This isn't a residential neighborhood. It's farmland. Look it up." The officers exchanged glances. One sighed, nodding. "Yeah, we figured. Your zoning records check out, but we had to follow up. Seems like someone's got it out for you." Tom's jaw tightened. "Let me guess. Karen Miller?" The officers didn't confirm, but their knowing smirk said everything. Karen was behind this. That night, Tom installed security cameras along his fence line, capturing every vehicle that slowed down near his property. He was done playing defense. If Karen wanted a fight, she was about to get one. The first police visit had been annoying, but Tom had assumed that with no violations found, that would be the end of it. He was wrong. Barely 2 days later, another patrol car rolled up his gravel driveway. This time, it was 2 different officers, their expressions already tinged with irritation, as if they knew this was a waste of time but had to follow through regardless. Tom leaned against the porch railing, arms crossed. "Let me guess. Another complaint." The officer, a stocky man with a gruff voice, flipped through his notepad. "We got a report of excessive noise disturbances coming from your property." Tom exhaled sharply. "Noise disturbances?" He gestured toward his land, silent except for the occasional cluck from his chickens and the distant rustle of wind through the trees. "Unless my goats are throwing late-night parties, I think you've been misinformed." The second officer, a younger woman, sighed. "Look, we're required to check, but—" She hesitated, then added, "You're not the first person in this area getting these kinds of calls." Tom narrowed his eyes. "What do you mean?" The officer hesitated, but then shrugged. "We've been getting a lot of petty complaints from this HOA. Most of them turn out to be bogus. If I had to guess, someone's trying to make your life difficult." Tom clenched his jaw. "Karen." The officers left soon after, confirming no violations, but that wasn't the end of it. The next morning, he found a bright orange notice pinned to his gate, bearing the HOA's letterhead. "Final notice. You are in violation of Willow Creek Estates HOA guidelines. Immediate compliance is required to avoid fines, remove all livestock, clear debris, and restore uniform community aesthetics." Tom ripped the notice down and marched to his truck. Enough was enough. He drove straight to the HOA office, a sleek little building nestled in the center of the suburb, and barged through the glass doors. Inside, Karen sat behind a polished desk, smiling smugly when she saw him. "Mr. Wilson, how lovely to see you. Here to finally comply." Tom slammed the notice onto her desk. "You need to stop this." Karen picked up the paper delicately, like it was contaminated. "I'm afraid I don't know what you mean." Tom's fingers curled into fists. "I'm not part of your HOA. Stop putting your garbage notices on my property. Stop calling the police. Stop sending your people to harass me." Karen leaned forward, her eyes glinting with cold amusement. "Oh, Mr. Wilson, you don't understand. You may think you're not part of this community, but your property affects us all. We have standards to uphold, and if you refuse to cooperate—" She gave a delicate shrug. "There are ways to ensure compliance." Tom's stomach turned. "Are you threatening me?" Karen tilted her head. "Of course not. I'm simply stating that the community has expectations, and we always find ways to meet them." That night, Tom heard something outside. He grabbed his flashlight and shotgun, stepping onto the porch. A dark figure sprinted away from his barn, and as he reached the building, he saw the door had been left open, his chickens scattered, 2 of them missing. He felt a slow, burning fury rise in his chest. This wasn't just harassment anymore. This was war. Tom barely slept that night. He spent hours rounding up his chickens, repairing the latch on his barn door, and reviewing footage from his security cameras. The grainy black and white video showed exactly what he expected. 2 figures creeping onto his property, opening the barn doors and scattering his livestock. One of them even spray-painted something on his fence before running off. By sunrise, he walked over to inspect the damage. Across the wooden planks in bright red paint were the words, "Unsuitable for residential living to be removed." His stomach twisted. This wasn't just vandalism. This was a message. Before he could even process his next move, a sleek black SUV pulled into his driveway. The driver's door swung open, and out stepped a man in a tailored suit, flanked by 2 more men in business casual attire. They didn't look like HOA board members. They looked like lawyers. The lead man, a tall figure with a sharp haircut and a smug smirk, extended a hand. "Mr. Wilson, I'm Richard Davenport. I represent Willow Creek Estates and its property management division." Tom didn't shake his hand. You've got about 10 seconds to tell me why you're here before I tell you to leave." Davenport didn't seem fazed. Instead, he pulled a thick envelope from his briefcase and handed it to Tom. "Consider this a professional courtesy. We've reviewed the original land documents for your property, and it appears there's been a clerical oversight." Tom ripped open the envelope and scanned the papers. His pulse quickened. The document claimed that his land was technically annexed into Willow Creek Estates 5 years ago as part of an expansion plan. According to their argument, his farm was now subject to HOA jurisdiction. Tom barked out a bitter laugh. "This is the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. My land was never part of Willow Creek Estates, and it sure as hell wasn't annexed without my knowledge." Davenport smiled like he was talking to a child. Paperwork can be complicated. Sometimes properties are included in rezoning efforts, and it seems yours was overlooked. Fortunately, we're here to help sort this out. You have 2 options: comply with HOA guidelines and begin the process of conforming to community standards, or, he tilted his head, sell. Tom's fists clenched. "Sell?" Davenport nodded. "Willow Creek Estates is offering a generous sum for your property. More than market value, in fact. We'd take care of everything: title transfers, legal fees, moving costs. All you'd have to do is sign." He paused, then added with a slight edge, "It's a fair deal. And much easier than fighting a legal battle you might not win." Tom felt his blood boil. This was their plan all along. The fake HOA violations, the police harassment, the vandalism. It was all to pressure him into selling. They wanted his land, and they were willing to play dirty to get it. He stepped closer, locking eyes with Davenport. "I don't care what's in this envelope. I'm not selling, and I'm sure as hell not following any HOA rules that don't apply to me. You tell Karen and whoever else is behind this that they picked the wrong guy to mess with." Davenport's smirk faltered for just a moment, then returned. "I was hoping you'd see reason, Mr. Wilson, but I suppose some people need a stronger push." He turned to leave, calling over his shoulder, "I'd reconsider if I were you. Things might get difficult." As the SUV disappeared down the road, Tom clenched the papers in his fist. They thought they could force him out. They were about to find out just how wrong they were. Tom stood in his kitchen, the bogus legal documents spread across his table, his mind racing. They thought they could intimidate him, trick him into selling. If the HOA wanted a fight, they were going to get one. He spent the next 2 days preparing his response. First, he called his lawyer, an old military buddy turned real estate attorney, Mark Reynolds. After scanning the paperwork, Mark's reaction was immediate. "This is a complete sham. They forged documents or manipulated zoning records. I'll get to the bottom of it." Meanwhile, Tom took a more direct approach. He printed out the property deed, zoning laws, and HOA jurisdiction maps, highlighting the clear boundary lines that excluded his land. Then, he did something Karen would hate. He drove into Willow Creek Estates and started handing out copies to residents. At first, people looked confused. Some even ignored him. But a few took the papers, reading through them with increasing concern. Tom made sure to highlight the fraudulent land grab attempt. "If they can do this to me," he warned an elderly couple watering their garden, "what's stopping them from pulling the same stunt on you?" The whisper campaign worked faster than he expected. By the end of the day, residents were talking, questioning, doubting. Several even told him they'd been pressured into expensive upgrades they never agreed to. But Tom wasn't done. He wanted public exposure. That night, he emailed 3 local news stations, attaching his security footage, copies of the falsified documents, and the history of HOA harassment. By morning, his story was being shared on social media. And then came the biggest shock yet. At 5 a.m., Tom's phone rang. Mark's voice was sharp. "You need to get down to the county records office, now." Tom arrived to find Mark furious. "I pulled official property records from 5 years ago and compared them to the ones in Davenport's proposal. The signatures on the annexation approval? Fake. The land transfer? Never legally processed. This is full-on fraud, Tom. They're screwed." Tom grinned. "Then let's burn them down." By mid-afternoon, Tom had filed a formal legal complaint against Willow Creek Estates HOA for fraud, harassment, and trespassing. The county's legal team agreed to launch an investigation, and Mark assured him that Karen and Davenport would have a hell of a time explaining themselves. Karen, however, had one more trick up her sleeve. That evening, as Tom sat on his porch watching the sunset, the familiar sight of red and blue flashing lights filled his driveway. Not again. 2 squad cars rolled up, officers stepping out with grim expressions. This time, the charge was far worse than noise complaints or livestock violations. One of the officers, a young, serious-looking cop, approached. "Mr. Wilson, we received an anonymous report accusing you of operating an illegal butchering operation on your farm." Tom's stomach dropped. "Excuse me." The officer's jaw tightened. "The complaint alleges that you're slaughtering animals without proper permits, violating health and agricultural codes." Tom's fists clenched. He knew exactly who was behind this. Karen had just crossed the final line. Tom had faced a lot of nonsense from the HOA, but this, an accusation of running an illegal butchering operation, that was a new level of dirty. He stood on his porch, arms crossed, as the 2 officers exchanged wary glances, clearly uncomfortable. Even they knew this was a stretch. "Sir," the younger officer continued, shifting awkwardly, "we're going to need to inspect your property." Tom exhaled slowly, forcing himself to stay calm. Losing his temper would only make things worse. "Fine," he said, stepping aside, "but you're not going to find anything." For the next hour, the officers searched every inch of his barn, livestock enclosures, and storage sheds. They took notes, asked questions, but it was obvious. There was nothing illegal happening here. No evidence, no wrongdoing, just a well-maintained farm. Eventually, the older officer sighed and closed his notepad. "Sorry about this, Mr. Wilson. We have to follow up on reports, but yeah, this was a waste of time." "Let me guess," Tom said, arms still crossed. "The anonymous tip came from someone in Willow Creek Estates." The younger officer hesitated, then gave a reluctant nod. "Not officially, but off the record. You might want to lawyer up. Someone's got it out for you, and they're getting desperate." Tom didn't need to be told twice. The second the cops left, he was on the phone with Mark. "That's it," Tom growled. "We're taking this to court. No more warnings. No more playing nice." By the next morning, Mark had filed an official lawsuit against the Willow Creek Estates HOA, Karen Miller, and Richard Davenport. The charges? Defamation, harassment, trespassing, falsified legal documents, and attempted fraud. But that wasn't all. Tom also contacted the county's zoning office and handed over the altered land documents Davenport had given him. The moment officials saw the forgeries, they launched their own legal inquiry. Within a week, the scandal had exploded. Local news stations picked up the story, and suddenly, Karen and the HOA were in the spotlight for all the wrong reasons. The courtroom was packed. Reporters, angry Willow Creek residents, even some HOA board members who had no idea Karen had gone rogue. On one side sat Tom, Mark, and their legal team. On the other, Karen Davenport and their visibly sweating lawyer. Mark went first. He laid out every piece of evidence in brutal detail. The fake annexation documents, the repeated police harassment, the security footage of HOA members trespassing and vandalizing his property, the numerous bogus complaints made against him. Then, the county's zoning office confirmed what Tom already knew. His land had never been part of Willow Creek Estates. The annexation, a complete fabrication, but the final nail in the coffin. The witness testimonies. A former HOA board member took the stand, stating under oath that Karen had manipulated documents and pressured the board to go after Tom. Then came Officer Martinez, the cop who had responded to multiple complaints. He confirmed that Karen personally made many of those calls, urging police to find something, anything, to use against Tom. By the time Karen herself was forced to testify, her mask had completely cracked. "Mr. Wilson refused to follow the rules," she stammered. "He was ruining the uniformity of our community," Mark pounced. "You mean the community he was never part of? The one you knowingly targeted with fraudulent documents?" Karen paled. Davenport, realizing the ship was sinking, refused to answer any questions, hiding behind his lawyer. Then came the judge's verdict. After only an hour of deliberation, the ruling was delivered. Tom was awarded substantial damages for harassment and defamation. The county revoked Willow Creek Estates' ability to expand their HOA jurisdiction. Karen was personally fined and forced to step down as HOA president. Davenport was facing a possible criminal investigation for fraudulent land claims. The HOA officially crippled. As the courtroom emptied out, Tom stood outside, watching as Karen stormed past reporters, shoving microphones away. She looked defeated, humiliated. Mark clapped Tom on the shoulder. "You did it." Tom smirked. "Damn right I did." The fallout from the court case was swift and brutal. The moment the judge ruled against the HOA, it was as if a dam broke. The very foundation of Willow Creek Estates began to crumble. First, Karen resigned in disgrace, but not before attempting to spin herself as the victim. She gave a half-baked statement to the local news, claiming she had only been trying to maintain the high standards of the community, and that Tom had been an aggressive and combative neighbor. Unfortunately for her, nobody was buying it. The HOA board, desperate to distance themselves from her, called for an emergency vote. By the end of the night, Karen was officially removed from any leadership position, but the damage had already been done. Multiple homeowners filed complaints against the HOA, demanding transparency on where their dues had been going. Davenport, the shady lawyer, was now under criminal investigation. The county ruled that Willow Creek Estates had violated numerous ethical and legal boundaries, leading to strict new regulations that limited their power. As news of the fraud, harassment, and corruption spread, homeowners within Willow Creek Estates finally hit their breaking point. For years, they had blindly followed HOA rules, terrified of the repercussions if they stepped out of line. Now, seeing what they had done to Tom, they realized just how badly they had been manipulated. Within weeks, a petition to dissolve the HOA entirely was circulating. Residents stopped paying their dues until they got answers. The once feared HOA board meetings turned into chaotic shouting matches, with people demanding refunds and accountability. It became so bad that some of the remaining board members began resigning out of fear. And then the final blow came. A month after the trial, Willow Creek Estates held a neighborhood-wide vote. The ballot had one question: should the HOA be permanently disbanded? The results? An overwhelming 82% voted yes. And just like that, Willow Creek Estates HOA ceased to exist. Without the HOA, homeowners were finally free. They could paint their houses any color they wanted, park where they pleased, and live without the constant threat of fines and penalties. Tom had done what no one else had dared to do. He had brought down the most powerful HOA in the area. With Karen and the HOA out of his hair, Tom finally had what he wanted all along: peace and freedom. His farm was thriving. The once hostile neighbors, now his best customers. Every weekend, people from the neighborhood came to his farm stand, buying fresh eggs, vegetables, and homemade goods. Parents brought their kids to see his animals, something the old HOA would have never allowed. Even some of his former enemies now shook his hand, admitting that they had been wrong to side with the HOA. But the best moment? One afternoon, as Tom sat on his porch drinking coffee, he noticed a moving truck pull up to Karen's house. He watched with quiet satisfaction as she stormed out of her home, barking orders at the movers. She was leaving. For good. As her car drove past his property one last time, their eyes met through the window. Tom raised his coffee mug in a mock toast. Karen? She just scowled and looked away. It was over. Tom had won. And for the first time in a long time, life was exactly the way he wanted it. The sun hung low over the rolling fields of Tom's farm, casting a golden glow across the land he had fought so hard to keep. For the first time in months, everything was quiet. Not the uneasy, suffocating silence of tension, but the peaceful kind. The kind that only came when you knew the battle was over, and you had won. Tom leaned back in his porch chair, his boots propped up on the railing, and let out a slow, satisfied breath. He had spent so long fighting off the HOA's relentless harassment, and now they were gone. Willow Creek Estates was finally free, and his farm, the land that Karen and her cronies had desperately tried to take from him, was stronger than ever. The destruction of the HOA set off changes that no one had expected. Without the strict rules and fines, many residents realized how much they had been living in fear. Now they were repainting their houses, planting gardens, and actually enjoying their homes for the first time in years. New businesses started popping up in the community, as former HOA restrictions had strangled any attempt at local commerce. Tom's farm stand was just the beginning. Even the local government took notice, launching an investigation into how many other HOAs were engaging in similar corrupt practices. Karen's downfall became a warning to other power-hungry HOA leaders. As for Karen, she was gone. Last Tom heard, she had moved to another city, trying to start fresh. But her reputation, destroyed. Davenport, the lawyer who had masterminded the fraudulent annexation scheme, was facing disbarment, and multiple homeowners from Willow Creek Estates were suing him for damages. Justice, as it turned out, had a long reach. Sitting there on his porch, Tom thought about everything he had learned through this mess. Power-hungry people will always try to control what isn't theirs. The moment you stop standing your ground, you've already lost. Bullies, whether they're HOA tyrants or corporate lawyers, count on people being too afraid to fight back. Tom had refused to be afraid, and that had made all the difference. He glanced out at his land, where a few kids from the neighborhood were laughing as they fed his goats. Just months ago, these same families had feared the HOA's wrath. Now, they were free. Tom smirked, taking a slow sip of his coffee. If they had just left him alone, he wouldn't have fought back. But they had tried to take what was his, and in the end, he had taken everything from them instead.